So just to introduce our speaker, obviously the author of the book we're launching today, and many other great writings, a member of the Socialist Workers Network in Ireland, and editor of the Irish Marxist Review. So warm welcome to John Molyneux, and yeah, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. As they say, should you like what I say, then. Speaking last night, I had difficulty with this, but we'll see. Hopefully this works well. Right. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that I'm no stranger to 10 o'clock in the morning at Marxism on a Sunday morning. And I'm always rather amazed that anybody comes at all. So you're all extremely welcome. Thank you for making the effort to get here. In the old days, the problem was always that one had partied on Saturday night. Now I'm in my 70s, it's even harder. But anyway, right. With the book launch, I suppose the place to start always, as in a book, is with acknowledgements. And with a book like this, which is based on writings done over nearly 50 years, that's very difficult because the debts accumulated are enormous. I've discussed that in the preface to the book, and here I'm only going to mention the people who were directly involved, but there's a huge amount of accumulated debts over decades of really all the comrades you were involved with and learned from. So as far as this book is concerned, my first debt is to my editor, Hugh Williams, over there on the left. It was a real pleasure to work with, and who I worked with at every stage in the preparation of the book and the selection of the material and so on. Also my long-standing comrade and friend. So that's my first main debt. The others that I must mention is to Colin Bryce and all at Bookmarks. Colin did a fantastic job of seeing it through to publication. And organising it. Roger Huddle, who designed it, another long-standing comrade. John Rudge, who prepared the selected bibliography at the end, which he did a fantastic job on. And I'd like to thank people like Joseph Chunara, Trevor Ngwane from South Africa, Ronnie Casriels from South Africa, Paul LeBlanc from America, Judy Cox, Alex Kalinikos, Richard Boyd Barrett from Ireland for their endorsements and blurbs and so on. So those are the particular debts. And as I say, the wider ones are discussed in the preface above all to the comrades. Now, as I say, the book is a kind of condensation of my writings on Marxism and socialism in the cause of Marxism and revolutionary socialism since the 70s. And the first substantial publication that I produced was Marxism and the Party. It actually nearly didn't come out. The fact that it did, because there were disputes going on with the publisher, and the fact that it did come out at all was largely due, or in part due, to the late Tony Cliff, who also edited the book with enormous skill. That was a great privilege to have worked with him in that way. But the main point I want to make about that, Marxism and the Party, is that it discussed the question of your Marxist ideas on building a revolutionary party, and it did so out of practice, out of an experience. And that was the experience, the actual political practice of trying to build a party in the context of especially the great workers' struggles of the early 70s. You know, the two miners' strikes, the Pentonville 5, Dockers, and the highest period in industrial struggle that Britain has experienced since the Second World War and so on. And it was out of that actual practice that I came to consider and write the book, and it was written really to try and establish a different relationship, a different model of the relationship between the party and the class from that which was dominant at the time, which was the Stalinist model, and also different from what tended to be the practice in terms of what I suppose what we would call orthodox Trotskyism of the time. A much more interactive relationship between party and class. And those things are a theme throughout the book. I think the whole book, I would say, that all the writings that I've done have always been connected to that practice. And that question of trying to write for a working class readership, I'll come back to that point, but to bring Marxist ideas into dialogue and interaction with the workers' movement. Right, now the book is organised thematically, not chronologically, and the first topic, the first theme is called simply the working class. And that is not by accident. That reflects my view that the question of the working class is the cornerstone of socialism and Marxism. And I mean that in various senses. I don't just mean that it's a core belief of Marxists that the working class is the agent of socialism. Of course, that is absolutely fundamental. But I mean it in a deeper sense as well, that Marxism is, and Marxists ought to be, theorists of the proletariat, to quote Marx himself. It was, for Marx, it was the discovery of the working class and an understanding of its potential to change the world that was actually the starting point of him becoming a Marxist. You can read it in his writings in 1843, 1844. There is announced in the introduction to the critique, to a contribution, it's a terribly long title, to a contribution to a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, which is kind of really off-putting, you know. But the introduction deals fundamentally with two questions. One is religion, great stuff he wrote on religion, you know, Marxism is the, religion is the opium of the people and so on, that sort of passage. But also he announces we need a class with radical change. Wonderful phrase, a class with radical change. And that class is the proletariat. And socialism will be arise from the social existence of the working class. Right? And that's for me, has always been central. I think the whole of Marxist theory, the whole of Marxist philosophy and various other topics that get discussed are, in a sense, the world, history, society, everything viewed from the standpoint of the working class. And in that context, one of the most, I think, the most important pieces and the most relevant pieces in this book is called Socialism and the Working Class Today. It's quite long. It's new, so even if you've read a lot of my stuff, this is new. This is relatively recently written, and it addresses what I think is a fundamental problem of the socialist movement internationally. That problem is that the movement was, if you go back to the days of Marx and Engels, all the days of the Second International, all the days of the Third International, it was assumed by everybody, and was true in fact, that the movement was a movement of the working class. But history, above all the rise of Stalinism and the rise of fascism, destroyed that organic link between Marxist ideas and the working class, and in a sense exiled revolutionary socialists from that class. And that has remained true in part right up to today. And you can see it reflected throughout lots of, you know, tiny sects and the divisions in the movement and so on, and in the way the movement, I'm speaking internationally here, operates. And to me, an absolutely fundamental task is to heal the rift that has emerged between Marxist ideas and the working class. And so that article addresses that question. It looks into the causes, it looks into the nature of it, and it makes an argument that the changed nature of the working class, the new working class that has emerged over the last 30, 20, 10 years, makes the healing of that rift possible if we seize the opportunity. That working class is now enormously stronger than it ever was. There's no comparison in terms of its numbers in the world to when Marx wrote or when Lenin wrote. I mean, when Marx said workers of the world unite, they barely existed. There would be now, something like, depending on how you estimate it, 400 to 500 million in China. And every country in the world of any size has a substantial working class. And these people are often in revolt, whether you're talking about in Sudan or Sri Lanka, or the great wave of revolts in 2019 in countries where I think Ecuador is in revolt as well again now, and so on, that was then, or Chile and so on. Across the world, this class is in revolt. So the opportunity to connect socialist ideas is there, and that's a central theme about. The second topic is about revolution, and I joined the movement as a revolutionary, right, in 1968, particularly under the inspiration of May 68 in France and so on. That was my starting point. And to be honest, I've never really been attracted by reformist politics. I fight for reforms, of course, that's a necessary part of the struggle, but reformist politics as such never exercised an appeal to me. And I just want to say a couple of words about revolution in this context. Revolution is a word that is used in all sorts of different ways. I remember Bernie Sanders came to Ireland, and I went to hear him speak, and we were all given a free copy of his book, which was called Our Revolution. Very good, except you realised, of course, this was entirely metaphorical. Bernie Sanders rendered a great service. I'm not having a go at him in that sense. But what he meant by revolution was that he would get elected as president and he would change lots of things. Pity it didn't happen. But he didn't mean, that's not what I meant by, and not what I mean by revolution. What I meant by revolution, what I mean by it now, is exactly what Marx meant by it, what the Paris Commune was, what Lenin meant by it. That is a mass uprising of the working class, the self-emancipation of the working class, through mass strikes, through factory occupations, through monster demonstrations, and culminating in the smashing of the capitalist state and the establishment of a new state based on organisations of the working class, Soviets, workers' councils, popular assemblies, whatever they may be called. That's the vision of a revolution that I defend and outline in this book. And that is, the reason for that is not just that Marx said it or Lenin said it. The reason is simple. I've never been able to see, to be honest, any other way in which you were going to be able to get rid of capitalism. I never believed it could be done through a parliamentary road to socialism. I mean, the capitalists just simply won't let it happen. The example of Chile proves that, but the example of how they reacted to even the faintest glimmer of it in Britain with Corbyn. They couldn't stand the thought of a socialist, even not a revolutionary type, but any sort of socialist, even leading the Labour Party. They used all their power to smash it. Think what they were going to do if they're faced with real threat of workers' power and a real challenge to the system. Of course they won't let it proceed without putting up the most stubborn resistance, using all their resources, and only the mass mobilisation of the working class will break that. That's why I defended and continue to defend that position. I jump ahead a little bit. I won't deal with each of the sections of the book, but I jump ahead a little bit to the section on philosophy. I think it was a feature, I'm not sure about this, but it feels, looking back, that those of us who joined the movement in '68 were always very interested in the philosophical aspects of Marxism, partly because I think we thought we were trying to really think it through, and these were new ideas, and it was very dramatic. And there were lots of the people who were associated with the movement then, maybe Sartre, maybe Marcuse, and so on. These people were into philosophy. So we got I remember when, in my first year as a student, and just joined the IS, you know, we were sitting around in our group, kind of reading the theses on Feuerbach together, and so on. So philosophy was always which, if you haven't read them, they're very short, so they're very easy to read in that respect. But that's what we're doing, poring over things, and I've always been interested in it. I repeat the point that, to me, the key to the philosophy of Marxism is that it is an expression, intellectually, theoretically, of the social being of the working class. And it is on that basis that you arrive at a solution of philosophical problems that have been there for centuries. In particular, problem that interested me was the question of determinism. Is history determined? Are there laws of history that decide what will happen inevitably? Or to what extent does human action, human praxis, allow history to be challenged and changed and affected? Now, at the beginning, I think I was overwhelmingly concerned to attack deterministic views of Marxism. That seemed to me the main enemy, as it were, particularly, of course, because of the history of Stalinism, which espoused that kind of determinism to a great deal. But later on, I found also the bourgeoisie and its ideology was very concerned to attack determinism, to the point of arguing there was no pattern in history whatsoever. I mean, the whole postmodernist phenomenon was concerned to say there is no grand narrative at all. They're just different stories, and you do what you like, sort of thing. And there is no real determinism and no relationship between ideas and the material world, and so on. And I equally rejected that. And so in the section on philosophy, there's an extract from a long article that I wrote on Is Marxism Deterministic, which kind of addresses those arguments, argues essentially for the fact that there is an element of determinism in history, but it's not absolute. And there are all sorts of tipping points and moments when that history can be decisively shaped by the intervention of revolutionaries, particularly through a revolutionary party, the Russian Revolution being one, and hopefully we will see more. And again, my argument was that my starting point was, think of the situation of the worker. The worker confronts material conditions and material reality in their social being. Both the material reality of the object that has to be shaped, you know, the coal that has to be hewn, the wood that has to be cut, and so on. Both that material reality and the reality of material conditions that working class people have to struggle with every day. So that material determination and that effect on them is absolutely real in a way that it isn't for the academic, intellectual philosophy. It depends in part on the labour of others. But at the same time, the worker's relationship to the material, to the wood or the coal, and to those material conditions is one that they are acting on it. It is to do with human work that it is shaping that material heritage that you face, those material conditions. And so I thought that the position of the working class thought through was the key to understanding that question. Now I'm going to leap ahead to the section on Ireland. In 2010, I retired from a job I enjoyed a great deal, teaching art history, which, you know, embodied a lot of my other writing, but I retired from my job, moved to Ireland, and that had two effects. First of all, it gave me a lot more time to write, and I became the editor of the Irish Marxist Review, and I think it's probably the case that in Ireland I have published more articles and books or something as I did in the previous 30 years. So it resulted in a considerable increase in output. But it was also an important political experience for me, in the sense that I found, again, for both objective reasons, the rising struggle of the Irish working class, and we went through a period of great struggle, culminating in the magnificent water charges movement, which was a huge working class movement, which we were very closely involved with. There's a little piece about it in the book. But partly for objective reasons and partly for subjective reasons, I think I learned in Ireland a lot about how revolutionaries can relate to working class people and to working class struggle. And I saw that model being put into practice around me, and how people and how revolutionaries could emerge not just as, members of the party and as it were, slightly separated propagandists, but also as real tribunes of the people, as real tribunes of their communities, and how that could be used to build the organisation and to build a real presence in the political debate of the society. And a lot of that is recorded in an article here called What is People Before Profit? Also written because I know just from talking to people that people outside Ireland don't know what people before profit is, or many people don't. The meeting on Ireland, it was described variously as a campaign or a united front. People come up to me and say, is it like respect? Because people are translating books, their own experiences. It's not like that. So it's quite a big radical party with thousands of members, led by revolutionary socialists. And there's something slightly different new. So there's an essay in the book on that. And I'm going to have to watch my time. I will be quick now. The book culminates in a section on shorter journalism. One of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that I wrote a column for Socialist Worker in Britain for 14 years, best part of 14 years, every week, more or less, from 1984, the miners' strike, through to 1997, and only stopped because I was seriously ill. But that's... I warned about these microphones. I know something the matter. That's scary, isn't it?
Bet that wakes everyone up.
Thanks. Do I just continue? Yeah, right, good. Good. And I continued writing that kind of piece in Ireland, and there's a section of those shorter journalistic pieces. But again, the point is that I valued it. I think it's interesting. Sounds arrogant to say. It's hard to say my point without sounding ridiculous. But I mean, it is a fact that all the greatest Marxists, whether you're talking about Marx or Trotsky or Lenin or Rosa Luxemburg, I read a lot of her journalism just recently and so on, that these people wrote journalism as well as Capital or the history of the Russian Revolution, because in journalism that contact with practice is there, all right, all the time, and you are writing in a form that is, as far as you can, meant to be available to and in dialogue with working class people. And that behind that journalism was not just me saying, you, my audience, should think this, but also me trying to think, what were the questions, what were the problems, what were the arguments you were facing at work, what were the questions that came up in the pub, and respond to those. And that link with practice was there all the time. So I think it's good that the book finishes with some examples of those work. And the last point I want to come to, there's a section here on the question of the environment, climate change, and the problems that raises. I'm dealing with that last. It's not the end section, but I'm dealing with that last in this talk because it enables me to make some general points. I first became aware of climate change in the early noughties. And I joined this campaign in Britain, the campaign to stop climate change. And from the beginning, I thought capitalism is not going to do this. You know, it is going to take a socialist revolution to stop climate change. That was how I thought about it at the time. I found this argument didn't go down very well with people in the environmental movement. In fact, they were very annoyed by it. They said, look, we don't have time to wait for your socialist revolution that seemed to them a long way away, very abstract. So we don't have time to wait. We need action now. And I thought, well, I'm not going to win this argument probably with words, but we'll see. My view then and now was that however distant revolution may be, it's going to be a lot nearer and quicker than capitalism greening itself and transforming itself into a system that will live harmoniously with the environment and not destroy it. And I have to say that each year that has passed in this direction has proved me right on this question. And if you look at the world today, there's no question. Now, I've been involved a lot through a thing called the Global Eco-Socialist Network, which is just a network whereby Marxists and socialists concerned with the environment talk to each other around the world. At the last meeting, just a week ago, we had reports from different places around the world of what was happening in South Africa, in Australia, in America, and so on. Or you could look at the news, the latest decision of the Supreme Court in America, following the horrible Roe v. Wade decision. They've also decided to, stop Biden doing even the limited environmental measures that he wanted. What is very, very clear is this system is not going to tackle climate change. Every opportunity, we have COP26, we're going to do all these wonderful things, and then it comes to it and they come up with nothing. Then something happens. Ukraine war. Oh, forget all about that. We need more oil, we need more guns, we need more everything. It's all forgotten. The moment something. Well, capitalism, life doesn't run smoothly, and they will keep on having emergencies in which they forget and go completely the opposite direction. So they're not going to tackle the system. And I think that's a vindication, horrible as it is, it's a horrible vindication of everything written in the book, of the necessity of mass working class socialist revolution. One more point I want to make. Just simply saying that unless we make the revolution, we're going to face catastrophe is not enough, in my opinion. Because the fact that something is necessary doesn't mean it's now going to happen. It was necessary that there should be a workers' united front between the socialists, social democrats and the communists to stop Hitler, as Trotsky explained in the early 1930s. It didn't happen. What happened with Hitler happened. So saying something is necessary doesn't necessarily mean it will happen. But I think, and I think this is very important, that the way climate change will affect the mass of people across the world will create the conditions that make revolution possible. It is not going to be like the dinosaurs, where there is a sudden moment, 2030, 2050, 2070 or some date, when the seas suddenly rise and we're all drowned. It isn't going to be like that. Human beings, goes back to the point, have the ability to intervene and change. There are 7 billion human beings on the planet, right? They can react to what happens, and they will, in my opinion. Climate change, with the catastrophes that it creates, with the fires, with the floods, with the storms, with terrible human suffering, but nevertheless it will undermine all the foundations of the system and push people into mass collective action, which will, I hope, with the intervention of revolutionaries, make it possible to overthrow this system and to restore a reasonable relationship between human beings and nature, to end the alienation from nature that Marx diagnosed in 1844, or with the concept of the metabolic rift and so on, to heal that and make a decent and indeed a magnificent future possible for human beings. So I see the question of climate change, much emphasized here at Marxism, and I'm sure it will be again today by Alex Kalinikos and others, as a central question that we face, both for the challenge it faces and for the opportunities we have to rebuild that relationship with the working class and enable the working class to move forward in its hundreds and thousands of millions to creating a better world. Thank you.
I wanted to say that when I first joined a revolutionary socialist organisation, reading John Molyneux's work was, not to fangirl, I'm really sorry, but was a really good guide to action and a really good guide to socialism, because it's what we were talking about in the groups. When you talk about socialism as an idea, especially around young people, there's sort of two images that are given to us. And it's one of Stalinism, and it's one of Jeremy Corbyn and Labourism, both of which are socialism from above. And if I'm honest, like, really aren't that exciting. I mean, everyone's like, oh wow, Joseph Stalin's cute when he's young, or Jeremy Corbyn's such a cool working class bloke. But in reality, like, what is exciting about socialism is the self-activity of the working class, and it is the fight against oppression, it is the fight for a liberated society, and I think that's what's really good about John's work, because it is so approachable and enjoyable to read. And I do look forward to reading the selected works. Maybe it's a bit of an ego boost for you that you get selected works. It's like, wow, look how cool I am. I'm so important that I can select works from me. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to reading the book. And I really hope it's a good book to have on people's shelves as a guide to the movement. I'm really glad that there's arguments in here on overpopulation, on socialism and trans rights, on racism. Because I think it really goes to show that although we need to talk about the working class, and about revolution, about the revolutionary party, and about philosophy, all of things which are important guides to the movement and important guides to building a social society, it doesn't leave out the important things. And that's what I've always enjoyed about John's work, is that it's never just an abstract idea of working class people with cool beards going out on strike and getting pissed in pubs talking about trade unions. It is the working class within it, and that's what I think it's really good about this book. But yeah, congrats on getting a selected works there.
Thanks very much. Could we go next to the person here in the front row?
John, I want to ask you a question about the part that you were talking about towards the end, the climate disaster to come. I'm sorry, I'm surprising myself as I open my mouth. I'm not really sure what I'm going to say. To me, you look at on the images you see on the television at the moment, massive floods in oh God, what's the country called?
Bangladesh.
Thank you, John. Sorry, and storms across the Caribbean, heat waves burning down Australia, even a bit of Wanstead Heath up the top of my road caught fire. You know, it's but all of these places, most of these places, are places that don't have a sort of a huge developed capitalism, and we're going to overcome it somehow. We're going to build defences. We're going to change something somehow. Yeah. The notion that capitalism's going to do it for us, because I don't think it is. If it's effective, it will just go somewhere else and let the people behind get on with it. But it's how we make that jump from relying, well, not even. I don't even think it's relying or expecting. I'm not sure the correct word.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But for capitalism to do that, make those infrastructure changes, at the same time, the people in that country suffering so much that they're coming together to rise up. That seems such a mismatch together that I find it hard to get my head around. Thank you very much.
Yeah, up here towards the back.
Thank you. So, my name is Tara. I come from the Tongan-speaking territories of what you would know as British Columbia. They're unceded traditional lands, and just for those of you who don't know, we're in the habit now of always recognizing territories that we come from in acknowledgement of the colonial history. I'm a trade unionist and I'm a teacher, and I also found the kind of your first point around workers not seeing, I guess I would say it, maybe people don't, both in the climate movement and even in my own trade union, and I think in trade unions somewhat generally, they don't see trade union action as an agent of change. Like within the climate movement, there's a lot of discussion of theories of change, and of course there's all kinds of ideas out there. But that's not a dominant one. But I think you're absolutely right that kind of the key is to be ready, because I think things are going to shift incredibly quickly. So we had a heat dome a year ago, and just like a year and 5 days ago, It was so hot that one day an entire town actually burnt to the ground in a matter of hours. And interestingly, I've been spending I was kind of motivated to get involved in climate action around the time the IPCC report came out. And I've been working to try and get my union to take climate action more seriously. And I have this kind of vision that the way to make that connection is to actually bargain for climate demands. That the way we're going to get workers on strike over climate is actually to make them bargaining issues. And it's been really, really frustrating until that moment happened where we actually saw a devastating heat that like 800 people died in one day. We were completely unprepared. And then following that devastating floods, of course the fires make the flooding worse, and it's on the farmland, and so people are now actually starting to think about food security and these other issues, and this is in a wealthy, developed part of the world. And so my own union actually for the first time this year at our annual general meeting, climate is like at the top of the priority list. So just to say, like, my experience is that what you're kind of arguing in the abstract sense, I think, is coming to fruition, and the challenge is, how do we harness that, that moment when it comes, because it's full of all kinds of other debates, when those questions arise. So, thank you.
We had indication over here, followed by in the back.
Okay, thanks. I'm standing up, didn't realise that. I didn't go to a party, I didn't get asked. The question, John, is about reform and revolution. And I know we, as socialists, we don't talk about human nature being fixed, but is reformism a sort of a natural state? Because, the Labour Party have got quite a few more members than the SWP. And I just wonder what is it, I think we're all reformists in a sense. I think we're chipping away at the old three axes, aren't we? Better, So I just wondered, is it the natural state, if there is such, I know there is such a natural, does that comes in the natural thing it is. And finally, I've got a complaint. You've got those how many years working as an art teacher, etc. I can't see anything here about art.
I have an answer to that one. I have a good answer to that one.
There's contribution at the back, followed by here in the front row. Third row, sorry.
Thanks. I think you said, John, that in Ireland you developed a deeper understanding of how you can be, as a revolutionary, also a tribune of your community, of your workplace, of your people. And this may or may not be controversial, I don't know, but probably it's fair to say that the Irish group is among the most successful, if not the most successful in certain respects, in our international tendency, proportionally speaking, for the size of the population. And I wonder if you think there are any particular lessons of people before profit, whether they're, I'm not suggesting that they can be mechanically transferred to say, the situation here or necessarily in other countries, but perhaps more broadly in terms of the lessons in the context that I just mentioned at the beginning and you referred to in your talk.
Thank you. Just here in the third row, followed by over here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, John. I'm from Marx 21. I'm Helena, Marx 21 in Germany, and a lot of your work is very inspirational for many comrades, the work that we translate. I'd have a practical question, especially regarding climate change and what you write on it. So, and I'd love to get to hear your take on it. Recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, a new president was elected in Colombia, Petro, and he said in a speech that the opposition doesn't have to worry about them eliminating capitalism because they first have to get rid of Colombian feudalism. And it's this old, Stalinist stages theory, but it's still very prevalent. And I was wondering what your take is on that, because especially in many countries in the global south, among socialists, that's the idea that's most widespread. And I was wondering what you would say to those socialists who do have this opinion that they first have to develop capitalism a bit more. Thank you.
Just here in the front row, followed by the team member here.
It's both a plug and a sort of question, I guess, or observation asked of John. The plug is for people to buy the book and to get other revolutionaries and radicals to buy the book, because I think it covers such a huge span of areas which are of life and death importance. I mean, most obviously climate change, and about understanding the world and understanding how change happens. And from my view, I think the thing about climate change, it will impel large amounts of people. People don't go into huge struggles because they've pre-formed ideas. What happens, people go into move into big struggles almost because they have to, because it becomes life or death. And in large parts of the globe now, it is life or death about the question of what we need to do. And in a way, it's about the system cannot give the reforms needed to actually deal with the crisis which is unfolded. If you think about the First World War, you think about the Russian Revolution, you think about the Bolshevik Party going from, I don't know, what is it, 20,000 to 300,000, and the Menshevs used to complain about the Bolsheviks. The trouble with the Bolsheviks, the only reason that people are joining you is because you're against the war and you want the workers to take control of the factories and you want the peasants to have the land. Well, I thought that wasn't a bad idea. And so they didn't, and they used to complain that your members, hadn't read the Communist Manifesto, didn't understand the fulcrum. The thing in Russia, people were impelled to do that because of the carnage of the war and the economic collapse. The thing I want to ask John is, the book, in a way, it comes out of '68. The image is a great one because John's political radicalisation comes out of '68, as did so many people. And it's interesting that John says, I was never attracted by reformism, not just the Labour Party, but reformism. And I think I don't know if that would be true today of large amounts of people. That jump straight to wanting some form of Marxist or revolutionary politics. It's like different, but I would say, I don't know if John agrees, that the level of radicalisation is, in one sense, broader than it was probably in '68, but not as intense, if that makes. I would imagine in '68 your debates are about what is Marxism, Che Guevara, is it Mao, is it Trotsky, and so on and so forth. Where it's that those are not. I mean, there's some of those debates are taking place now, interestingly enough, with the re-emergence of some attraction to some forms of sort of soft Stalinism. But do you think that's true that there's a broader sense of anti-capitalist sentiment, I would say, around today compared to '68?
Followed by the individual in the back.
First of all, you've convinced me to buy the book. So thanks for joining my bookmarks account even more than it already is. Secondly, I want to deal with this question of, is reformism natural, things like that, because look, reforms are natural as part of the capitalist system. Capitalism goes through cycles of boom and burst. It goes into crisis sometimes, and then it recovers to an extent. And when it's on the way up, the system can accept reforms, and we can fight for reforms. And to be honest, at any time, it's possible to fight for a certain degree of reforms. And we do that. However, that does not make us in any way reformist, because the difference between being a reformist and a revolutionary, at least for me, is if you're a revolutionary, you say these reforms are good, but that is not our strategy, that is not our central focus, and it's not our end goal. The central idea is this idea, like the Corbyn said, of socialism from above versus from below. If you believe in socialism from above, if you're a reformist, what you're saying is that as long as we get into power using the methods that the system presents to us, we will be able to change things and we will be able to liberate the working class. If you're a revolutionary, you can say that will help and those reforms are important, but that will not change things. That is not our goal. Our goal is to work outside of that system and fight for real fundamental change. And actually that's a much more successful, a much more effective way of fighting for reforms. there's a quote that a lot of people say of like, revolutionaries are the best at fighting for reforms. Sorry, is that 3 minutes or 2?
2, sorry.
2, thanks. I don't want to speak for too long. And I think that's really true, because when we fight outside of that, outside of the parliamentary system, and when we fight as a working class, that is how we can really affect change. But ultimately, it is about revolution. It is about a much wider question of fundamental shift in society. And that's what we're doing in the SWP. It's what the Labour Party is absolutely not doing and has never been about. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Well, look, I haven't read John's book yet because it's just come out, but I urge everyone else to buy it. Because one of the things that I think John made clear is that our rulers now have dropped all pretense at the idea that capitalism can avert catastrophe. It's now admitted, really, that it's baked into the future of the system. Think about the question of climate change. The war in Ukraine has meant that all rulers has now dropped any limited pledges to moving away from fossil fuels. Suddenly the war in Ukraine means that the race for oil, coal and gas is back on to be energy secure. Think about the war in Ukraine itself. Any idea that capitalism is committed to peace or cooperation, suddenly that's out the window. It's now an arms race across Europe with NATO leading it. Think about the question of the pandemic. Again, there's no real pledge to the idea that we're going to limit what COVID does or how many people it kills. It's now a thing of we live with it. And all of these processes are intensifying. Because capitalism and our rulers admit that, basically this is baked in, we can have every suggestion that these processes are going to intensify. And I think what that means is, for us, is 2 things. One is that the argument that time is running out is an incredibly significant one now. When John talked about, in the climate movement a couple of years ago, we were the minority in terms of making revolutionary arguments. I think there's now a much stronger footing to say that it's more unrealistic to think that capitalism is going to tame climate change through reforms over 50, 60, 70 years, rather than the idea we need a revolution sooner to deal with it. I'm not saying we're the majority, but I'm saying it's much better footing to argue it. The second thing I think is that the political instability created by those crises is going to accelerate. And it's true, there will be big gains for the right, the meeting next door talking about Le Pen in France and far right, but there will be opportunities as well. This instability has created cycles of revolt. You think about the late 1990s, you think about 2011 in Egypt and Europe, and you think about the process in Sudan and elsewhere now. Those opportunities, I think, give us the chance to point to working class activity to intervene. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that John and his book will talk about, is that there is a question of us intervening in this and taking an opportunity to pull the brake and use revolution as a way to do that.
Just here in the middle, followed by just behind.
Bangladesh was mentioned earlier, the floods in Bangladesh, and then the fires in Australia, and a little fire in Hampstead Heath. The bed of capitalism started in Bangladesh. If we look at the matches we use, it's made by a child in Bangladesh, the sweatshops. If we look at the t-shirts, it seems like we're millions of miles away, but we're not. We are reaping the rewards. A little fire in Hampstead Heath. We're lucky to have a little fire in Hampstead Heath. And capitalism is everywhere. How can we say we can't see it? In Bangladesh, hundreds of years before the East India Company went, before the British went, they knew their land very well. They knew which plains flooded, and so they would move. Just before the rains, they would move to safety, where there was accommodation for them, and then when the rains passed, they would return. So they had a system. But because the land has been capitalism, is the factories, all the outsourcing that we do, how the people have been treated, that's why today, where we are today, and it's so horrid. And I think we're very fortunate, but we mustn't forget when any little tragedy happens in the West, we should always compare it to a tragedy that's happened in Bangladesh, in the global South, and it's 100 times worse. So that's how we're linked with capitalism, and that's where capitalism is everywhere. Our food was transported from Bangladesh, leaving hundreds, thousands hungry to be fed here. So there is a big link, and it's good to be mindful of it, so that, you know, and we're more connected than we think, although it seems like the global South is so far away, and capitalism isn't really, because it's something you can't see and hold.
Here in the row behind the speaker.
Hello. I think one of the things that revolutions always struggle with, and one of the biggest challenges, is the link between theory and practice. And you know, people rightly said that for revolutionaries, we have the luxury of time to try and develop a good kind of theory, but the theory is only as good as the practice that it relates to. And I think that's, you know, where, I mean, oddly enough, I first came across John, he probably won't recall, but so I was a member of the audience about probably 45 years ago, in a public meeting. In fact, a similar one to this Socialist worker organized conference. And obviously there are other speakers there as well. And what's interesting is then I went away and did other things. And today is the first meeting that I've come to after all those years. Is I was just sitting back and thinking, what's changed? What has changed over all this period? And that's why I'd be really interested to hear John's views, because, you know, you've been a revolutionary for all this time. You've been writing a lot, etc. What is the? How much more penetration have we got in terms of the relationship of the party to the working class, you know, in those times, and what has been the main obstacle? Because it seems like déjà vu that I feel like I was back in the early 80s with some of the discussion, the demographics of people, and a lot of people being very kind of confident that revolution is the way, anything bad is capitalism, and socialism or revolution is all good things and so on, almost like a religious kind of conversion. But the challenge still is, how do you get, you know, I was talking to people yesterday, you know, and I was just saying that if you talk to 10 socialists here to describe what socialism might look like to them, you'll get 11 answers. You know, it's like the old thing, you know, they said, you ask 3 economists about the cause of the crisis and you get 4 different answers. So the challenge is, what does it look like? And then how do we get from where you are today to there? And if the working class is the agency to do it, what is the evidence that the theory that's been developed in the last 40 years by yourself and others has increased that kind of penetration of it? Because without that, you know, do you ever question, what are we doing? What's all this about? Are we on the right path? Are we up some cul-de-sac? So I'd be really interested to hear your views, because you've obviously been involved in this for 50 odd years. Over a long range view, if you transport yourself back to the 70s or 60s and to today, what is the difference in terms of the bridge between the party and the people? Thanks.
We'll take one more contributor here in the second row before we bring John back.
Back to the argument about reform versus revolution. Given that the Russian Revolution is the only successful example we have of a workers' insurrectionary uprising led by the Revolutionary Party, and it took place in an autocratic society which partly shaped the way that socialists and Marxists had to organise. If you look at other high points of insurrectionary struggle, whether it be Portugal 74, Iran 79, more recently Egypt or Sudan, these are all autocratic regimes. And there's an old argument that really societies where there's an advanced form of bourgeois democracy, the struggle takes a different path, and a different kind of party is needed. And I'm full of compliments for the way that our comrades in People Before Profit put radical left-wing socialist ideas into the public domain in Ireland. But I don't think it actually badges itself as a revolutionary organisation. So I just wonder, do you think there is any argument that in a bourgeois democracy, the way that socialists organise and that change will come will not look the same as it took place in autocratic regimes?
So thanks again to everybody that's contributed, and I'll bring John back to sum up for 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, and thanks for all the contributions and questions. Quite a lot of the questions I felt like, well, that needs a meeting to answer that, or an article, which maybe I've written. And it would be difficult to do justice to them in a summing up, but I'll try as best I can to cover the ground. I'll start with the easy ones. Why nothing about art in it? Because that's in the book, The Dialectics of Art, which I published last year. And so having published that 2 years ago now, this is about the writings on socialism and revolution directly, but there's plenty of the art stuff in The Dialectics of Art there. So that's a nice, easy one. Easy one is perhaps not the right way to put it, but the question about feudalism, I did laugh when I saw that Joseph Chunara was debating with Yanis Varoufakis about is it a new techno-feudalism or is it capitalism? I sometimes think there is a long backstory to this with Stalinism. Because Stalinism had a strategy of alliance with the bourgeoisie and the Popular Front, and then they continued it afterwards, particularly, everywhere really, but it was always dressed up in a particular way in what were called then the Third World or the underdeveloped countries and so on. You have to ally yourself with the national bourgeoisie, etc. They raised the bar for what constituted capitalism so high that almost nowhere became capitalist. Spain in 1936 was still feudal, all right, you could sort of make a case for that, but everywhere was still feudal. I remember talking in a meeting about the Egyptian revolution as it was happening, and somebody getting up, an old Stalinist, got up and said, John Molyneux doesn't understand anything about Marxism. What they need in Egypt is not less capitalism, but more capitalism. Well, they got it, and it looked very good. So that's the backstory to that. We're avoiding things. Theoretically, it's nonsense. It has to be said. I didn't hear what Yanis Varoufakis had to say, but I'm sure Joseph demolished. This is an absurd argument. And it's not true in Colombia either. Latin America has been capitalist for a long time. And all these places, like the comrade speaking about capitalism in Bangladesh and so on, they're poor. Bangladesh is certainly poor. It's massively exploited, but it's exploited capitalistically. And so on. So the argument isn't true, and the argument is precisely about evading working class struggles, which I'll move straight on to the comrade from Bangladesh. I have, for a short period, visited Bangladesh, so I'm always in my mind about the situation in Bangladesh. I will make a couple of comments about this. If you are aware of the circumstances in Bangladesh, which has a population, am I right, of about 160 million in quite a small country, desperately poor, that climate change was always going to be a catastrophe on an appalling scale for Bangladesh. It couldn't be otherwise. It's not just a question of nature and the flooding, it's that the society is not geared to be able to have an infrastructure that will protect people or look after people. So it's always going to be really a horror story. But there are real links. I mean, there are lots of Bangladeshi people in Britain, and even where there aren't huge numbers of Bangladeshi, I was struck by the fact that in Ireland a couple of years ago, and Mary will correct me if I get the details wrong, there was a strike by workers. It was the Debenham strike, wasn't it, Mary? That we talked about. Debenham's workers were on strike, defending their own jobs. They'd all been sacked. When a catastrophe occurred for the garment workers in Bangladesh. And these striking workers in Ireland had a benefit in collective money for the Bangladeshi workers. And it was a lovely act of solidarity. And you can build that solidarity, that their struggle is our struggle is their struggle. And it's more possible to do that in the world today. There's always been an element of that. The First Nations, Native Americans collected for the Irish during the famine. That's in the 19th century, that's still commemorated. That's always been there in the working class movement, but there's more possibilities for it than ever before. And in fact, there's a segue onto some of the changes that have taken place. Look, in the period since 68, the struggle doesn't just go in one direction. It goes up, it goes down. You make advances, you suffer defeats, and we suffered terrible defeats. I referred to the great work in Britain, I'm talking about now here, the great working class upsurge between 1968 and 74 brought down the Tory government of Ted Heath. There were the two great miners' strikes, Saltley Gates, Pentonville Dockers, and all of that fantastic level of struggle. But that struggle was incorporated and defeated, largely due to the Labour Party's social contract that it introduced, a problem we've had in Ireland as well, and there was a generalised downturn in working class struggle. I can't tell the whole story, but we went backwards. Then the 80s was a horrible time in many ways, characterised by a magnificent struggle of the miners, but a defeated struggle. Then you had the poll tax, then you had recovery. It's a complex story. It's not up and down, not simply you move in one direction or rather than another. You have to advance, you have to retreat, you have to regroup, and different tactics apply in different situations. But one fundamental change has happened, one of the most important changes that happened during this period, is the transformation in the international working class. And that is discussed, I mentioned it, but it's discussed at length in the book, in the chapter or the section, Socialism and the working class today. It is not just a question of it getting enormously bigger that I referred to, though that's extremely important. It's also the case that countries that used to be largely peasant have become now largely urban, which changes the whole terms of the debate. In the 60s, Hugh Williams referred to it, we were debating Che Guevara and Guevarism and the Guevarist strategy a lot. Or the Castroite strategy, go and form a folkie in the mountains and come from the mountains to the town and so on. That's dead in Latin America, not because it's one set of arguments to be in another, but because all the Latin American countries are now thoroughly urbanized. So a country like Chile, for example, there's something like, I put the figures in the book, it's about 80% or more urban. So is Argentina, so is Brazil, so is, all these. Many of the indigenous people are now in cities. There's a city based among indigenous people, the so-called Amerindians of the Amazon. There's 2 million people in it. And or in Ecuador, you're talking about an alliance there was in 2019 between the indigenous people and the trade unions that more or less captured the capital city of Ecuador, Quito, drove the government out of it. So that change is enormously important. The working class is more international than ever before through migration and so on. So it's more multicultural than ever before. It's more feminized than ever. There's more women in the workforce. It's more diverse. And you see this. So the old image of the working class as the white male worker, be they docker or engineering worker or whatever they were, is not what the working class looks like today. Not at all. It's completely transformed. And that then relates to issues like the question of homophobia. Racism, homophobia, sexism, trans rights, all those issues. It's not just that if you're interested in working class liberation, it's morally right to support those things. Of course it is. But there's something else involved. That's what our class looks like now, right? That's what our class is. It contains all those things. That's why in Ireland you get a majority vote for gay marriage. Right? That's why you get a majority vote for repeal and for abortion rights. I knew that was going to happen. But those issues are part of our class reconstituting itself, and unless we have unity on those issues, and you can only have unity by supporting the oppressed, we can't unite the class. There's quite a bit in, how that's different from the 80s and so on. Again, the question was it is true that there was a particular intensity to 1968, but it was also true that you were quite isolated in your community holding those views. I held those views in my street in Southampton when I first became a revolutionary. There was me and the people in the house. In Ireland, it relates, I'm not going to get through all this, I know, but in Ireland, and during the water charges, our campaign against the water charges now, I met in our front room, and the members of the committee of the campaign against water charges in our area were all our immediate neighbours. So that there's a change there, and there's a change also in that we cut with the majority of working class people on a huge number of issues like racism and sexism and so on in a very different way. So that is very important. Oh gosh, I wanted to make a long replies about, the question about reform and revolution, the question about climate change. I'll be as quick as I can. Right, we are in favour of people fighting for reforms. Right, revolution grows out of the struggle for reforms. It's not counterposed to it. Rosa Luxemburg makes this point right at the beginning of social reform or revolution. And the Russian Revolution grew out of working class people fighting over immediate concrete issues, against the war, against bread shortages, for land, and so on. It becomes that in that struggle, it becomes a concrete possibility of changing the state, of smashing the existing state. That emerges out of the struggle for concrete demands. Our work is naturally reformed. No, nature doesn't come into it. Nature is, if there was ever a natural state for human beings, it's 100,000 years ago or something, it doesn't apply. But there is a sense that in a capitalist society, which gives minor reforms and the possibility of reform, that workers turn first to reformism rather than revolution. Why wouldn't you? You start with, can I do something about the local library being closed? Can I do something about defending my job? Can I do something about winning a wage increase and so on? That's how the struggle develops. The job of revolutionaries is to be involved with that and putting concrete suggestions and proposals for the way forward and developing concrete demands out of it and bringing those people in a revolutionary direction and raising the level of struggle to the point where it challenges the state. The shortest possible answer to the question that was asked at the back about people before profit, I found the comrades in People Before Profit, who were also members of the Socialist Workers Network, were revolutionary socialists, were very good at doing this and developed real relationships with local people through it. And what does People Before Profit brand itself a revolutionary party? No, it doesn't. There is space to join People Before Profit if you're a working class person who wants to be a militant reformist, but increasingly, over the years, People Before Profit does take revolutionary positions, like on the war of Ukraine. There's no difference between the position taken on the war in Ukraine and that of the SWN and so on. So it's moving organically in that direction. And, right, I know, okay. Can I say just on climate quickly? I'll be very quick.
We've got to leave people wanting more, so they'll buy the book.
Okay, well, I'll talk to you about it later, Steve, because it's a good question. Okay, thank you. Shouldn't ask so many questions.
Thank you very much.